Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because we are jumping right into a fascinating deep dive based on some brilliant analysis from the City Club of New York. We're looking at resiliency planning for the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, or the BMT. Now, on the surface, sure, this sounds like a pretty standard engineering challenge about a port. But as we're going to see, saving this massive coastal infrastructure is actually completely intertwined with the survival of the everyday people and the entire neighborhood living right next door. If you wanted to understand how modern cities are quite literally racing to keep their heads above water, you are definitely in the right place.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the multi-front climate threat. Then we'll look at engineering a resilient terminal, move on to protecting the neighborhood, and finally, rethinking the waterfront.
Okay, part one, the multi-front climate threat. We're dealing with rising tides and hidden hazards here. This threat to New York's waterfront is so much more insidious than that simple Hollywood image of a giant wave crashing over a concrete wall.
Before we get into the real nuts and bolts of the solutions, let's just make sure we're on the same page about what resiliency actually means. We're talking about surviving extreme climate threats with minimal impact and, this is the absolutely crucial part, recovering as quickly and affordably as possible. It's essentially about long-term survival and rapid bounce back for highly vulnerable coastal systems.
Now, if you're ever wondering, why should we spend billions of dollars on this stuff? Well, you can just point to this unbelievable ratio. Based on U.S. government assessments and our source material, the financial logic is rock solid. Every single dollar invested in resiliency typically saves us between $4 to $11 in avoided future losses. 4 to 11. Designing for the future isn't just an environmental must, it's a massive financial imperative.
So what exactly is the threat? We are basically fighting a multi-front war here. You've got the obvious coastal threats like massive storm surges driven by hurricanes. Then you have inland threats, right? Extreme, severe precipitation just dumping water onto city streets. But the third one, the subsurface threat, is arguably the most terrifying. Heavy rain from above, combined with rising sea levels pushing in from the sides, acts like a giant vice that literally pushes the groundwater table up from directly beneath our feet. Rising groundwater and salinity is this quiet, hidden hazard that attacks our infrastructure from below, completely regardless of how tall a wall we build on the shoreline.
Moving on to part two, engineering a resilient terminal and designing for the future. Let's see how heavy maritime engineering tackles these massive physical challenges head-on.
In the world of climate adaptation, we generally look at 4 core pillars of resilience design. Step 1 is defend, building levees or barriers. Step 2 is accommodate, basically raising or floating your structures to deal with the water. Step 3 is retreat, moving inland. Though, actually, our source points out the obvious irony here. A working marine terminal can't exactly pack up and retreat away from the water. And finally, Step 4 is operational preparedness. So, since a port can't retreat, we've got to focus heavily on defending and accommodating.
But that brings up a huge question. How high do we actually build? A number you hear all the time in current city plans is 14 feet above a standard baseline. But the analysis we're looking at makes it crystal clear. 14 feet is at best a midterm solution. That barely gets us safely into the 2050s. If we're going to be pouring massive amounts of concrete, we really need to think bigger.
If we want this infrastructure to genuinely survive until the year 2100, we need to hit 18 feet. And this isn't just some random target. The math is simple, but it's pretty sobering. You take the catastrophic 12-foot storm surge we saw during Superstorm Sandy, and you add the projected 6 feet of sea level rise expected by 2100. 12 plus 6 gives us that crucial 18-foot survival line.
So, how on earth do you build a working dock to handle 18 feet of water? We basically have 2 primary approaches for accommodating that much water. The first option is fixed raised piers. These are anchored deep into the harbor, using heavy pilings. They're incredible at handling heavy vertical loads from cargo cranes and the lateral force of waves and massive ships. But they require incredible amounts of foundation work. The second option? Floating piers. These literally float right on top of the harbor. They brilliantly self-adjust to sea level rise, but the big trade-off is they need intense stabilization to keep them from tilting when you put heavy cargo on them. In reality, an ideal, resilient terminal is probably going to need a strategic mix of both.
And of course, before all those billions of dollars in concrete and steel are even in place, we have that fourth pillar we mentioned, operational preparedness. This is our crucial short-term shield.
Weather tracking usually gives us a 48-hour warning window for severe storms. Having a master emergency plan to efficiently move sensitive cargo, smaller boats, and critical equipment to higher sheltered ground within those 48 hours is absolutely vital to keeping the whole operation viable while the permanent defenses are being built.
All right, part 3, protecting the neighborhood and the ripple effect. A terminal doesn't exist in a vacuum, so let's look at how the engineering at the port directly impacts the people living right next door in Red Hook and Gowanus. You know, it's a completely natural question to ask. If the ocean is the main threat, why can't we just build a giant wall around the entire Red Hook neighborhood to keep it dry? It sounds like such a logical fix. But unfortunately, asking that question uncovers the terrifying reality of modern urban flooding. The crucial issue here is what we can call the backdoor threat. Because so much of Red Hook was built over old marshland, the soil is incredibly permeable. When sea levels rise, the hydrostatic pressure forces groundwater to infiltrate straight up through the dirt. And to make matters worse, New York uses combined stormwater and sewer lines. During a massive surge, those pipes get overtopped and backflow. Without serious intervention, that brings stormwater and literal raw sewage directly up through manholes and, horrifyingly, right out of the bathroom fixtures on the ground floors of people's homes. A giant perimeter seawall does literally nothing to stop water that's coming up from underneath and inside your own plumbing.
Because of that nightmare scenario, the source analysis details why we desperately need holistic solutions. You simply cannot protect the marine terminal in a vacuum without protecting the neighborhood. It's all connected. We need integrated levees connecting the terminal directly to Red Hook. We need massive storm gates to stop surges from running up the Gowanus Canal. We have to upgrade the neighborhood's civic plumbing with one-directional sewer outfalls so water can only flow out, not in. And we have to install community-wide groundwater pumping stations just to keep the water table down artificially. It is a massive, highly interconnected puzzle.
Which brings us to part 4, rethinking the waterfront, justice, jobs, and the future. When we start talking about spending billions on these interconnected systems, we really have to look at the societal implications raised by the source material.
The source analysis highlights a core argument contrasting two very different visions for the area's future. One vision is retaining and upgrading the terminal as a maritime hub. Proponents argue this creates strong, local working-class jobs and allows for integrated flood protection that serves the whole community. The alternative vision is developing the space into luxury housing. The report points out impartially that this residential vision would require building an exclusive, billion-dollar elevated plateau just to protect those specific buildings, which critics argue would simply isolate wealth and accelerate the gentrification of an existing working-class neighborhood.
Which leaves us with an incredibly powerful, lingering question to wrap up our explainer today. As cities globally spend billions on climate adaptation, who is it really for? Are these massive investments in seawalls and pumping stations going to be used to protect our existing vulnerable communities? Or is climate resiliency just going to become a tool to pave the way for exclusive luxury urban renewal? The engineering challenges, complex as they are totally solvable. But the choices we make with that engineering are going to define the very soul of our cities for the next century. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.